Thank you for joining today's webinar. We are going to go ahead and get started. As we get started, we want to go ahead and know where participants are joining from. So you will see a chat box on your screen. If you can type in the city that you're joining us from, that way we can get a sense of who we have in the audience, and also you can get familiarized with some of the tools that you have on this platform. Okay, so we're starting to see some responses from Pensacola, Pottstown in Pennsylvania, LA, Hollywood, Denver, Portland. Great. So it sounds like there are a lot of different cities represented, and there's definitely some diversity as far as where people are joining us from. We're really excited to be able to have this discussion today. We're going to be talking about the collaboration with runaway and homeless youth providers in order to serve survivors of trafficking. And we're really excited to explore how anti-trafficking organizations can partner and collaborate in order to serve the needs of survivors, specifically youth who have been trafficked. So on your screen, you're going to see the slide deck. You'll also see that there is on the right-hand side a list of resources that you can click on, and they're already attached for your reference. And some of our presenters are going to be talking about these resources today. In addition, you'll also see the chat box right below where a number of you have already interacted with us and telling us where you're joining from. Please go ahead and chat with any sort of question that you may have as we go through the presentation. We will have a question and answer session at the very end of the presentation, and we'll be able to take those questions at that time. We also did receive a number of questions for the presenters for during the registration process, so we'll be answering some of those as well. But we encourage you to chime in with any sort of question that you may have, and also if you have any examples of resources that you have found useful as it relates to working with runaway and homeless youth programs and anti-trafficking programs, please let us know. We know that there's a lot of expertise throughout the country, that a lot of the programs that you're working in, that they're doing really great work. And so we want to acknowledge that, and we want to make sure that we're learning from each other and that we're sharing best practices. So please feel free to share any information, any tips that you have in the chat box, because it's very useful for us all. So we're going to go ahead and start. If we can have the next slide, please. Today's webinar is being hosted by Freedom Network USA and the Housing Training and Technical Assistance Project, which provides training and technical assistance to service providers working with survivors of trafficking. We host bi-monthly webinars to explore topics on housing for survivors of trafficking, and that includes webinars with allied fields, and as you'll see today, we have some wonderful presenters from the Runaway and Homeless Youth field. So we're really excited to bring that. We also have a resource library that you can access on our website, freedomnetworkusa.org, and we provide technical assistance to service providers, like I mentioned, working with survivors of trafficking. And so there's a lot of resources, fact sheets, previous webinars, and reports at your disposal that everyone can access for free. So we encourage you to visit the website and access some of those resources there. Next slide. Today we have the great pleasure of hearing from two wonderful people in the Runaway and Homeless Youth field. McHenry is the Program Director of Homeless and Missing Youth Programs at Belle Fair, JBC. She has been offering intervention, safety, and short-term solutions for children and youth who are homeless. She has also provided training for law enforcement, community partners, professionals, and young people on the topic of homelessness. Additionally, she collaborates with her county juvenile court and the Department of Children and Family Services to develop safety plans for at-risk teens. So we're really excited to have Karen join us today. We also have Tammy, who's the Chief Strategic Initiatives Officer at the National Safe Place Network. She brings more than 25 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker, and she has worked on an inpatient psychiatric unit for youth, as well as served as a member of a mobile crisis unit. She's additionally worked as a therapist for a project dedicated to preventing sexual abuse of Appalachian children. Tammy has extensive experience working with runaway, homeless, and street youth, and she currently serves as the director of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, which is a federal center providing services to more than 600 programs in the United States and its territories. So we're really excited to also have Tammy join us today. Next slide. So for today, we are really hoping that we will engage with you as a participant to definitely provide some wonderful information that Tammy and Karen will be sharing, but also to hear from you all and what's working and some of the challenges that you all are seeing. So our goal today is really to learn from each other, to be able to learn about the structure of the Runaway and Homeless Youth System, be able to explore those resources that are available through those programs. And I'm sure you're going to hear this acronym, the RHY acronym, often throughout today. And just so we all are on the same page, obviously that stands for Runaway and Homeless Youth. And so we want to make sure that we address that right up top. And further, we're going to be able to hear how anti-trafficking programs can collaborate with Runaway and Homeless Youth programs in order to safely house youth survivors of trafficking. Next slide. Great. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Tammy, and she's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Karen. And I want to start by thanking Freedom Network for hosting these webinars and certainly for allowing me to participate. I can't tell you guys how excited I am because I know RHY and you know trafficking, and there's certainly an intersect between what goes on for our kids that are runaway, homeless, and street youth and that increased risk, vulnerability for becoming victims and survivors of trafficking. So thanks for letting me participate. I want to start by saying I am, in fact, the director of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, and I have to clarify the content that I'm going to be providing is not from me in that role, and certainly I need you to know that it doesn't reflect the opinions or the approved content from the Family and Youth Services Bureau, which is the primary funder for Runaway and Homeless Youth programs. That being said, I'm going to say a lot of stuff, and so hopefully some of it will be helpful. Next slide. Specifically, I wanted to just take a few minutes. If you have not been able to see or review the Voices of Youth Count study that came out from Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago, I will tell you it is a fantastic deep dive into some interviews and some data that came from talking to runaway and homeless youth from multiple sites across the country. The individual behind the study, Dr. Matt Morton, has been around a long time and really has a good sensitivity to the unique needs of kids. And so if your work overlaps with young people, I encourage you to go and look at the study. It's called Missed Opportunities, Youth Homelessness in America, National Estimates. And I'm going to hit a couple of highlights. And here's the deal. If you're sitting in your chair somewhere and you're like, seriously, she's going to tell me about homelessness? I've been doing this work. I know what I'm doing. No offense intended. It really is just about setting the stage for those who may not realize how much our young people may have in common with the individuals that you're serving. Next slide, please. So certainly some of the data that comes from the study are in front of you. 70%, 72% of the young people who slept on the streets also couch surfed. And that's a unique qualifier for runaway and homeless youth. I think there's a strong similarity with trafficked youth in that they're not always visible. They don't look like people expect them to look. They are easily missed, and they don't always tell people what their situation is. And so for young people, they will exhaust every opportunity to stay on someone's couch on someone's garage or even in someone's car versus coming in and accepting services from a system. The lack of trust is one of those things that I think is common across many service populations that we all deal with. Certainly, 52% of the young people that were interviewed felt unsafe. You understand that, and you understand the overlap with the individuals that you serve. Again, looking at 42% had experienced 2 or more episodes of being homeless or living on the streets. We know that a young person within 24 hours of first going onto the streets has an exponentially higher risk for encountering someone who's looking to do them harm. Is that trafficking potentially? Is it violence potentially? It's any number of risks simply by virtue of the fact that they are alone and they are vulnerable. And, within the Runaway and Homeless Youth field, there's a certain dive deep that we do in terms of predatory behavior on social media, predatory behavior through website contacts, just to understand that the same places where people are posting and forcing trafficked behavior on the internet, it's the same kids. There's many of the same kids that are involved. And 73% of them experienced an episode lasting longer than a month. So take a second and think about a kid, 13, 14 years old, on the street over a month. What's the likelihood that they've encountered somebody who is a danger for them? Pretty darn high. So let's go to the next slide. This is the last slide where I'm actually talking about data, and I just again wanted to set the stage. So of those young people that were interviewed by Chapin Hall, 1 in 10 young adults ages 18 to 25 had experienced a form of homelessness over a 12-month period. That's 1 in 10. That's a significant number. And when we think about young people who are homeless, it's not, again, the stereotypical view that some have of what homelessness looks like. Many young people who are homeless are college students, and the colleges close down for the summer or over the holidays, and these young people have nowhere to go in some communities. And certainly the same is true for younger youth. 1 in 30, ages 13 to 17, experienced that form of homelessness over a 12-month period. So the breadth of the incidence, the prevalence of homelessness is significant. The federal response certainly is dictated by authorized legislation and appropriations. The need is there, clearly. And we're going to talk about some of the ages and the things as we move forward. So let's jump in and go to the next slide, kind of set that stage for what homelessness is, and we're going to now jump into helping you understand kind of how the RHY system is set up. So if we can move to the next slide and then keep moving, that would be great. So brief history. Certainly there's been runaway and homeless youth for a long time, right? The first federal recognition of runaway and homeless youth services came in 1974. It was Title III of the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act of 1974, and just celebrated over 45 years of services to runaway and homeless youth. And while there's lots of things to celebrate, there's still a lot of work to be done. There aren't programs in every community. There aren't even programs in every state. And I want to think about, as we talk about potential for collaboration, as we talk about opportunities to connect with each other, how do we expand available services, not only for the individuals that you serve that may be under the age of 22, how do we expand the services for runaway and homeless youth? Certainly over the last, I would say 10 years, there has been a shift to increase the language within the authorized legislation to focus on youth who are at increased risk of sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. Those are the words used within the authorizing legislation specifically. Certainly, people can say, what does exploitation mean? What is sexual abuse? How do they differ? And you guys who do this work day in and day out, you know that there can be subtle variations and certainly similarities around what is being described by the words that different people, different systems use. Certainly we seem to all have our own definitions, and maybe sometimes that's part of the challenge. This particular legislation focuses on the language that you see on the screen. RHY providers have been doing this work forever. They didn't always call it trafficking. So those of you who've been around the field, I know some of you out there have been there, I've been doing this over 30 years, and we didn't talk about trafficking. And it was something different. And I remember back when the term survival sex started being used in the field, and that term felt like such a relief to some providers because it was a way to describe the behavior differently than the heretofore method of, the heretofore language where they used more negative language to describe our kids. And so the field is catching up, though the services have always happened. So it was not uncommon for RHY providers to see young people who came in, and what they were describing is today's trafficking, whether that be sex trafficking, labor trafficking. It is exactly what we see today. It just wasn't named trafficking. So providers have a deep commitment and understanding of trafficking in general. They just didn't always know that they were doing the great work that they're doing. Next slide. So when you think about RHY programs, there is a federal structure for funding RHY programs. And quite frankly, given the amount of allocation, I think RHY programs do a stellar job of stretching dollars as far as they can to serve the young people that fall within the scope of their services. These are RHY, Runaway and Homeless Youth. So for Runaway Youth, we're talking about young people who are away from home without parent or legal guardian permission. That's runaway. When you talk homeless youth, you're talking about young people who do not have a safe alternative. And we'll talk about the age ranges. I know someone asked, we'll talk about the age ranges in just a few minutes. And when we talk about street youth, it is that combination, any young person who has spent time on the street without a safe place to stay. And the vision of the RHY program was to create a continuum. So although it started with a shelter program that we'll talk about, it really was about meeting them where they are on the streets, most vulnerable position, and then getting them to a place that they can transition to independence, or if you will, interdependence with a system that is of support. So RHY programs are required to think about services and outcomes in 4 critical areas. You see those on your screen: safe and stable housing, education or employment, social and emotional well-being, and permanent connections to caring adults. I can't imagine a young person who has been through a situation that qualifies as trafficking not benefiting from these services. And certainly, how do you define that? There is a certain embracing within the RHY field of things that I think are similar to what I hear you guys are really embracing, specifically understanding the importance of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed services, positive youth development, utilizing best practices. There's a lot of motivational interviewing going on. There's a lot of support going on. There's a lot of attempt to define family in the way that the individual defines family. So there's a lot, I think, of synchronicity in the philosophy behind the work that we do. And all of the programs are really supposed to focus on these outcomes moving forward. Next slide. So federally, there are 4 types of funding for RHY youth as it relates to this particular program. And I'm going to briefly hit each of these so that you guys understand them. I know some of you are in communities that have RHY programs, and so this may be a refresher, so bear with me as you hear some news you might already know. And for those of you who aren't familiar, hopefully the structure will make sense. The first program that was established in 1974 is the Basic Center program. Next slide, please. And Basic Center is really about homeless youth under the age of 18. So a program is allowed to serve a young person up until 17 years of age, 364 days. On that 365 day, there has to be a plan, a transition plan, something in place for that young person. They can serve them up until that time. And specifically, there are some goals. Certainly for young people who are much younger, there is a push to look at how is family reunification possible. If that's not in the best interest of young people, How is kinship care possible? Looking at what is the best opportunity for those younger individuals. Certainly all of us know that sometimes system involvement is going to be required for young people that are under the age of 18. When there's not an option, they need help. Sometimes that's where they end up getting the help. So basic center programs can keep young people up to 21 days. So this is a short stabilization placement for young people to give people enough time to create service linkages, make sure the referrals are appropriate, provide follow-up. Now, there's somebody out there listening to my voice who laughed at that because you're like, 21 days, that is nothing. Do you know how long it takes to provide quality services to these young people and to these individuals? Absolutely. And it's why the collaboration we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the webinar is critical, because no single program can do it by themselves. Many of the programs have expanded services and received other funding to allow them to maintain young people longer than that. Federally, it's up to 21 days. Next slide. Street outreach, I referenced for you earlier, is that way to connect with young people, to let them know that there's someone that cares, there's someone there to help them, there's someone there that without judgment is going to try to help them create whatever it is they need. Maybe it's a safety plan. Maybe it is a way to understand what their options are. Maybe it's just them testing it out to see if they can trust you, and then they walk away and they turn the street corner, and there's that moment in your heart that you're like, I don't know if I'm ever going to see them again. Street outreach programs serve as that opening to this RHY continuum. Not every community has each of these programs. Some communities have street outreach, but they won't have the program that we talk about next. And so understanding that this specific program has a deep focus on connecting with youth to decrease that risk of victimization. And they provide outreach, education. Many of them do hygiene packs, cards, information to make sure that young people know what their options are. And some of the programs have really gotten savvy about the use of covert outreach materials, understanding the danger that young people may be in if someone finds them holding a card for services. They've really worked to utilize ways to connect young people to hotlines, to Polaris, to whoever it needs to be in a way that feels most safe for the young person. Next slide. Transitional living is that next piece of the continuum. It's for young people from the age of 16 up to the age of 22. Now, this is a little different. If they enter the program on their 21st year and they're almost about to turn 22, they still get the full length of services, even if they enter a program before their 22nd birthday. Now, there are a few of you who are thinking, well, you know, we know a lot about young people now. Isn't the age 25? Shouldn't we really be having services for 26, 27? There are lots of discussions and lots of advocates thinking about the best age range for these particular services. Currently, the authorized legislation takes it up to age 22. And they can provide long-term, safe, nurturing housing. And some programs do that through a host home model. So a young person's actually with a family. Some people do it through scattered apartments that are owned by an organization. Some do it through contracted partnerships with landlords in the community. Some have group settings where young people are living together in a congregate environment. And they focus on the things that you guys see in front of you, counseling and the mental health and basic life skills and interpersonal skills and all of the things that are important to help someone achieve. The challenge with young people who have been through a traumatic event, and certainly all of the people that we deal with qualify, is that their readiness, their capacity to jump into some of this stuff is not where it might be had they never experienced some of the things that they've experienced in their lives. And so programs are really sensitive to saying, you know, first we work on relationship, we work on rapport, we work on development of a common communication, we work on safety, and then we build into what makes sense for each youth. That is part of that trauma-informed care perspective that is so specific. All right, moving on to maternity group home. This is, in fact, a TLP program. And it is specific to young individuals who are pregnant or parenting. It is the same age range, the same services. There is just a layered understanding that they will also be doing parenting classes, nutrition classes, health classes, the things necessary for them to be in that role of a parent if that is where they are. Note I did not say mothers. Programs can, in most communities, also serve young men, trans youth, whatever is appropriate in TLP and in maternity group home. Specifically, maternity group home kind of locks it out and says it is for pregnant or parenting youth. Okay, so we talked about a brief overview of the RHY programs, and we talked about kind of what the kids look like, and you guys all know the needs that individuals who have been through significant trauma experience. We want to talk briefly about just some collaboration opportunities and then make sure that I have plenty of time for you guys to hear from Karen McHenry, who's going to knock your socks off about a model of services that they provide in her community. So when we collaborate with next RHY providers, we'll go to the next slide. Just want to give you guys some heads up about what that looks like. So next slide, please. RHY programs are required to have partnerships. It is not optional. Now, let's get it clear. They're not required to collaborate with you. And if they're smart, they will, because they really don't have expansive budgets or opportunities, and they need to have everyone at the table to make sure that everyone's getting the services that are critically required. So just know that if you approach an RHY provider or someone who provides RHY services, they're going to be looking to partner in most cases. It's not like you're going to have to sell that to them. They're also, if they're if they are federally funded, required to expand their internal capacity through training. And I think this is one of the things that the Freedom Network does so well, and that each of you probably do incredibly well in your community, in your state, in your region, wherever your territory is. That's that educational piece. What is it like for survivors? What do they need? How do you approach survivors in a trauma-informed way? Because guess what? Approaching someone that's been trafficked is not the same thing as approaching someone who's been abused or saw violence or been through some other trauma. Each trauma carries some different facets that you have to be aware of in order to be most emotionally, spiritually, and mindfully approachable. Programs vary in terms of their capacity to respond. I know some of the questions we're going to talk about later is, tell us about what a program can do in this case or in this case. It really does vary community to community. Some of you are in larger cities where there are strong human trafficking coalitions, where there is a continuum and regular staffing, and everyone from law enforcement to mental health to physical health to housing providers are all at the table. Some of you are in communities where you have to fight to make sure people understand that trafficking is taking place. And so just like your battle, RHY providers have different levels of capacity. So you may go to one and it may be like starting from scratch to build a collaboration that meets your needs. They may not have a bed as soon as you call them. There may not be a program in your community. It is about starting those conversations in your community about the possibilities of providing direct services to these kids. Most of the programs have received an overview of basic knowledge, so identification, some of the assessment tools, and they generally know the importance of referrals, and they have some level of referral network in their community, even if it's just one other provider. Again, you may be approaching them and you may be that one provider that they're looking for. And then there are other programs who operate specialized residential and support services, that they have managed to have whole programs that specialize for young people who have been trafficked. And so I want you to know, as you approach, you're going to see the whole gamut in your community, and to not give up on it just because it's not as advanced as you need it to be. Next slide. Potential challenges for collaborating with RHY providers is that sometimes, again, the young people that they serve, they don't come in and say, hey, I'm homeless. And they certainly don't come in and say, hey, I've been trafficked. They talk about their situations, and it's up to the capacity of the folks that are working with them to kind of identify those red flags and then respond in a way that doesn't frighten that young person away. RHY providers are, I think, in general, much more familiar with familial trafficking. This was something that my uncle was doing to me, my brother, my sister, my mother. They have a lot of experience in that. Less so when you start talking about refugees, young people who have been trafficked by strangers. That's something that is not as familiar to them, and I'm speaking just kind of aggregately, kind of generally, because certainly there's some experts that know exactly what they're doing. RHY programs have limited funds and limited time. So as I mentioned, they don't have huge budgets in most cases to provide those specialized services that we all know that the individuals you're working with need so desperately. And because of that timeline, I mentioned for a TLP, the base is like 18 months. It can be extended in an extenuating circumstance up to 24 months, but that's still not a lot of time. And so if you're talking about somebody that's 15 years old and the maximum length of time that they can be worked with potentially is 24 months, well, what do you do with that? Because they're still not developmentally where they need to be. And so how do you create those wraparound approaches to make sure that that young person can get those developmental needs met exactly when they need them? And certainly there are other challenges, and you guys might have some that you might want to post in the chat box via a question, other challenges that you've encountered, things that you have experienced. Moving on, we have got potential opportunities. And, I think I've tried to share with you the passion that I feel for these providers. Again, there are a lot of the providers who originally received federal funding, and because of the tight competition and the number of communities that need these services, sometimes these providers lose their funding and they just work hard towards sustaining services so that they can keep their doors open and keep providing critical resources to young people in need. So when you partner with them in general, you're getting a solid partner who gets what it is that you hope to accomplish. We talked about the strong alignment with youth development and trauma-informed principles. I think in general, it's very rare for me to run into a program that doesn't have a strong youth development approach or trauma-informed approach. I'm not gonna be dishonest with you guys. I mean, there are certain programs that specifically focus on a set population. So some RHY programs only serve girls. Some only serve young men. There are programs that focus on the LGBT population. There are programs, as I said, that have specialized human trafficking services, though that is certainly more rare than we would like it to be. Understanding the unique needs of youth facing multiple needs, they get it's not as simple as putting them in a classroom or getting them to the dentist or making sure they have transportation. It is all of that, and it's making sure they feel safe to sleep, that they feel safe to be in a room with a door shut, that they feel safe to have someone standing behind them. They get how people feel unsafe because of what they've been through. And so when they have to address all of those other needs to make sure that those core requirements are being addressed, this is the work that's done, and these are the people that are there to do it. And they, as I mentioned before, are desperate to partner with people who have shared mission, shared desire to make a difference. And so all of you do. And speaking of someone who has a great knowledge and history of partnership and making this world a better place, I'm going to turn it over to Karen McHenry. And Karen's going to talk to you about her specific agency, which is certainly reflective of some of the stuff that we see across the country. Karen, thanks.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you, Freedom Network. We're really excited about this opportunity. We are providing these services in Cleveland, Ohio, and through Belle Fair, which is our child welfare agency that we work through. So we're going to talk about just some building steps in collaboration. So starting this process out, if you have not already in your community, to pull partners together so we can better meet the needs of these girls and boys that are victimized in the community. Next slide, please. So Belle Fair has a variety of different outreach approaches that we use to collaborate, connect with these at-risk youth. And one of the special approaches we've used in our county is really looking at kids that are already missing. And so that's kind of a little different than some of the typical RHY programs, but we work very closely with law enforcement, schools, public transportation, and families in general just to see who's out there and missing. So we have over 210 kids missing as of today in our county, and that's really not a very good representation of how many kids are out there missing. So only 25% of all kids that go missing report them, their parents report them as missing, only 25%. So that's 75% of kids that could be out there in need of help, not having a safe place to stay, looking for food, and getting in some of these dangerous situations because truly they're looking for someone to take care of them. And when we talk specifically more about sex trafficking victims, they're looking for someone to love them. These kids don't feel that sense of belonging. And so, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about some questions to engage these teens that might be different than when you have, you know, that maybe you haven't thought about at your shelter before. Because we know that many of these kids, these youth, are coming from really dangerous situations, and a high percentage of these youth have been sexually abused. And so that's another thing that's really important to incorporate into our screening to make sure that we are really making sure that we get the full picture of this complex trauma that most of these youth are presenting to us. So we look at the triggers that led the youth to be out on the street. And so one of the things, and when we provide education, is that we help people understand that running is a behavior and that you're running to someone or from something. So you might have to run to report to your pimp. You might have to run because, you know, that bottom or somebody in the sex trafficking world says you have to leave and you need to be somewhere. Or you could be running because you're not safe at home. Maybe you're also being sexually abused, neglected. So that's something that we've really tried to help our community particularly kind of wrap their head around. That running is a symptom of what might really be going on for this youth, and they're not able to talk about it. They're still in survival mode, and they're just trying to get from one second to the next. So looking at the triggers that led these youth or the person in front of you to their situation, it's really, really important. And we work closely with law enforcement and probation officers so that they have a better understanding of that, and that these youth aren't becoming re-victimized as a result of their abuse. So one of the things we've done as far as outreach as well is work really closely with law enforcement, as we said, but we developed a monthly meeting, which I would highly recommend for people to do, with a representative from the Department of Children and Family Services, the missing person detectives, someone from the FBI, someone from juvenile court. We have someone from the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking, food pantries. I mean, you name it, somebody from the school board is on this, and we really sit there and process and look at different trends, maybe different neighborhoods that we see an increased vulnerability, how we can continue to collaborate and work together. So it's really, this meeting is something that we started, and you know, you think like, okay, well, this city is right next to this neighborhood. I'm sure that they're talking, but they're not. So we have really opened the doors to community partners and people that are really a lot of first responders. And they're saying, like, this is great because I didn't know that that was a warning sign. Or I didn't know that that tattoo meant something else to that girl. I didn't even know to ask. So providing a lot of education, awareness to our community partners has really helped us in our outreach. And so we do have, next slide please. So one of the things that we do is that we meet the teen and the community partners where they're at. So, we're out on the streets with our street outreach team. We are on public transportation looking for teens. We are, stopping in at our community partners, making sure that they know we have a 24/7 hotline. So if someone comes in and they don't have a phone, the community partner can say, like, they might be at the LGBT center. Hey, if you don't have a place to stay tonight, let's call this number together. So making sure that everybody knows in our community to call the hotline and make sure that people are connected, and then we're working on that engagement. And I think with our youth, that is really probably our biggest challenge. But if we can engage them, then we can help and work them through what we call like a warm transfer, where we get them to the next point. So we make sure that we're really active listeners, the staff, the outreach team. We're assessing for immediate needs, and that is constantly. We're helping the staff and training people to have an open heart, to be present, which is really something that we try to help with the teen too, like put the phone away. Let's try to figure out how we can come up with solutions. We're here for you. We're respecting you. And we're always being very mindful of their trauma, because many of them are extremely traumatized. And it takes a long time for them to get out of that survival mode, because that is just really how they get through the day. Many of them are so disconnected to their pain, particularly the sex trafficking victims, that to help them connect all those dots and look at what happened and validating it can be very challenging for them. And so emotionally and clinically, we don't want to push it until we know that they are in a safe, stable place, because we want to make sure that they're strong enough to be able to get through the day and not work through some of their past and their trauma. And then we're constantly educating community partners. The staff are always getting new training on, different resources in the community, different events that we might be able to go to connect with more youth, particularly in the winter here in Cleveland. It can be hard to find them. So we are in schools more. We're public transportation. We have a street outreach van, so we're literally like out on the street, just looking to make sure that people are okay, that they have a safe place to stay. Next slide, please. So at Belle Fair, we're really aware of having a survivor-centered services, right? So it's all about the youth. What can we do? How are we assessing these different elements that the youth is presenting with? So when we're assessing for safety and immediate need, some things that we might ask are, where did you stay last night? It's important that we don't just make an assumption, like, oh yeah, I heard you were at that shelter down the street, or I heard you're staying, here and there. We want to hear what they have to say, and we're empowering them by doing that, and we're keeping it trauma informed and keeping it very in the moment, because this can be very overwhelming, whether the youth is going to engage or they're going to trust. It's very important that we're being trauma informed. We identify the youths. We help the youth identify their goals, right? I mean, I have staff and teachers that are always like, oh, he needs new shoes. She needs a haircut. Okay, well, let's see what the youth needs to get through the day-to-day. And really, she might have just needed some personal hygiene products, and that was really what she was having a hard time finding. Other things, we have to make sure it's their agenda, it's their positives, it's their strengths that we're building off of. And obviously the positive youth development model really is helping us stay focused on building up the youth, building on their strengths, taking away their barriers, and helping them succeed. And then educating the youth on the dangers and harm reduction. And I think harm reduction can be missed so many times, whether it's somebody that is abusing opiates and as part of harm reduction they get some fentanyl strips, or the family starts to get Narcan kits so they can try to be supportive if there is an overdose or a situation. I mean, there's so many different ways of reducing harm. Some of them are simply, decreasing the risks of them when they're in the community. So this is a safe place that you can stay at. There are options. They might not always agree, but providing that education to reduce their harm is very important. So I went over the first question, but some of the ways that we get to these specific needs are, as I said, ask, where did you stay? And then we also just start to take this deeper dive, right, which is, who did you stay with? So depending on how engaged and trusting this person might feel, they might say oh, well, I stayed with my grandma, okay? And then they're still not really sharing, kind of being private about it, but just really wondering with them about, can you stay there tonight? How can I help you? Again, what you need to succeed. I mean, she might say I think you probably think I get a bus pass from my school, but I lost them all. So I just need a bus pass. I got to go to school tomorrow. I have a big test. And then tomorrow maybe we can talk some more. So really we take, again, where they're at. We meet them where they're at. So, and just continuing that engagement and building those relationships. And where is the youth at the process of change? I think that Tammy touched on that briefly, but we try to see where they're at with their readiness and their capacity based on their trauma. But this is a really big point with victims of sex trafficking. So unfortunately, we know that when a youth, for example, a 14-year-old has been groomed by a pimp, is then trafficked, that once they're in this life, that they call it living the life, it's very hard to get them out, right? Because maybe their option is to go back to another foster home. Maybe it's to go to a situation where they don't really feel that safe, and they know that that's their legal guardian and that we don't have maybe another option. So it's important that we're real with the youth. These are your options. This is what we can help you navigate. And some of them aren't the greatest options, and that's what we're constantly challenging the staff and community partners on, is what other options do we have out there for youth and young adults? Again, Tammy mentioned the college population. That is a population that we have advocated a great deal for. What do they do when there's a Christmas break? Do they have anywhere to go? Can they stay in the dorm? How can we make it so it's a non-judgmental, sensitive situation? And so we have worked with some of our local colleges around that to make sure that these students can succeed. Next slide, please. So when we talk about collaborating, there are just so many people at the table. This is such a small sampling. But what we did many years ago, it's kind of crazy. I mean, I've been at Belle Fair for 33 years, but probably 10 years ago, sat down with a handful of community partners and said, hey, this sex trafficking, these girls are being really victimized. Some of these LGBT kids are ending up in really dangerous situations because they can't find a place to stay. What can we do? And as Tammy said, sex trafficking has been around for centuries. I think the awareness, thankfully, has come from legislation as well as professionals being more trained and aware and really seeing the symptoms of the trafficking. So we're really aware of it because obviously it can become very dangerous very quickly. So we sat down, and it was our partners from Cleveland Rape Crisis, many anti-trafficking programs, and then over the whole collab in our community, we have the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking. and we all work very, very, very closely. And there's someone at the table from law enforcement. There's someone at the table from schools. We have a survivor's parent at the table. We have survivors at the table. People from shelters, homeless shelters, so they're educated, and they might know of a case where someone is really falling through the cracks and she's in a dangerous situation. LGBTQ centers, the AIDS task force, we have detox programs, as well as, we have like the fire departments, EMS at the table. And we have really worked hard to make sure everybody gets a seat at our table. And so in Cleveland, we have had some bigger events. So we've really taken on this sex trafficking education and this collaboration. So now we have even brought people to the table at like the state level. So we have people representative from like the Ohio Department of Public Service, Ohio Hotels and Lodging Associations. So it's been really unbelievable, all the different systems and different people that play a role in helping these victims and collaborating and having resources. I mean, this is crucial because when a youth that's a victim of sex trafficking is going to walk in your door, it's not going to be between 9 and 5. So you need to collaborate with people that are going to be available 24/7. How am I going to get this 20-year-old in detox? It's 9 o'clock at night. So we really have taken a look at the different levels of care, the different needs that our survivors are bringing to us, and collaborate. So we have like different subcommittees too in law enforcement. We have hospitality. We have response and intervention. So if anybody wants more information about, how do we start that? It's just really getting some core people in your community to the table, coming up with a mission, and then together just collaborating. So making sure that people are aware of what this agency does and what resources this place has, and where can somebody that's under 18 stay. So we could utilize one of our host homes. So building this coordinated response team has been a lot of work, but it also has been very successful. So we feel that people do know that there are people out there that care and that can intervene, whether they're ready for law enforcement, whether they need to get to the emergency room. We work with the sexual assault nurse examiners, and then they will call us, and really just cannot tell you enough, just increasing people's awareness that, hey, this girl in front of you that just came into the emergency room, she's missing. And she's been missing for like 9 months. So there's databases that we've shared, and they're public, but they're not that aware of them at times, to say, like, check this list. Let's see, like, people tend to check, like, if someone has a warrant, but we would also like people to check, is this person missing? Is this person in need of additional supports? And how can we wrap these services around them so they'll succeed? The next slide. Tammy, are you talking about Safe Place?
Karen, why don't you talk about it from the local level, and I'll do a national picture. Will that work?
Yep. So we have the National Safe Place program in our community, and it has been unbelievably successful. So in our community, and this can differ by your own community because you can develop this as the needs are in your community, so that's what's so wonderful about it. So when we started Safe Place, we were on the buses. So every rapid and bus in Cuyahoga County, so over 515 buses every day in rapids, have this yellow sticker that says Safe Place with the house on it right before you walk in. And all the bus drivers have been trained, dispatchers, to know that a teen or a young adult could come to them and say that they need help or they need a safe place. And then we have a program in place where we respond immediately through our hotline and see what that child might need. We also have expanded this program into the library system, which has been a huge success. Today we got a call from a youth that had been homeless for a very long time. Now he's a young adult and was really again in crisis, had no telephone, but was able to go to the librarian and say, can you call Safe Place for me? So, I mean, the libraries were very appreciative because they're not sure and they don't have a lot of resources. But, we were able to pick him up and actually get him some medical attention today. So, Safe Place is just a wonderful resource. You can also text for help, which is really awesome. And the students or youth really love texting anyway, So, that's really unbelievable that you can text the word safe and put your address, and within like 10 seconds, it will tell you the closest safe place to go, which might be a bus stop in our community. It might be the library, but if the library is closed, we also have signage on the doors to remind the youth to call the hotline that someone's available for them 24/7. All right, Tammy, did you want to expand more?
Thanks, Karen. Just briefly to say, and I know that there's a question coming up that we're going to get to in just a couple of minutes about safe place response time. I think, if you know and have seen these signs in some communities, it started as a brick and mortar type of opportunity to get kids linked to help. And that was in 1983, and it's a different day, it's a different time. So texting for help just kind of owns that a young person could be sitting in a closet somewhere or on a bench and all alone and need someone to interact with. And so even if you're not operating in a safe place community, or you're not somewhere where there's an RHY provider, you can communicate to a young person, and this is young people in that RHY age, so under the age of 22, you can communicate to them and say, look, if 24/7, 365, you just need somebody to chat with, you're feeling unsafe, or maybe you're feeling like it's not worth going on anymore, whatever that is, you're more than welcome to utilize this service and simply help them text for help. Next slide. And then this last resource was just kind of giving you guys a sense of, just like Freedom Network does such a fantastic job providing training and technical assistance, we manage it over on the RHY side. And so certainly the resources that are posted, if you look at your screen right above the chat function, there are a couple of resources there. Those are federally funded resources through the TNTA Center that you might find helpful to address some of your needs. Karen, I don't know if you want to say anything in conclusion.
Just, I guess, kind of in closing, Tammy had said it as well in her presentation, but when you're talking about victims of sex trafficking, as well as our RHY youth, they're not going to say that that's what they are. So that's why really being sensitive and trauma-informed and just very caring, just, are you okay? How can we help? That's really our motto, is providing help and hope at Belle Fair. And it's hard sometimes to even get them to that level where they're feeling a little bit hopeful. But we know that obviously for their mental health as well, that we want them to try to be a little more futuristic and goal-oriented so that they can continue to move ahead. So, and remembering that survival mode, that is really where we see most of our kids. It takes a while for that trauma bond, which would be a whole nother PowerPoint, or training, but to break down those barriers so we can really connect. So being aware and really taking it slow with our youth is so crucial. And we'll go into questions, I believe. Next. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Tammy and Karen, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with all of us. I think we found it extremely helpful to really hear the overarching system and also the on-ground collaboration. It sounds like there might be an echo coming from my end. Can you all just let me know if you're hearing an echo, and I'll see if I can fix my microphone. Okay, so I'm hearing some yeses. Okay, or I'm seeing some yeses. 1 second. I'm gonna go. I switched microphones. Can you just verify in the chat box if that sounds better? You could just give me a yes, or if there's still an echo. It sounds better, but okay, it sounds a little better. Okay, great. And so luckily we are now at the question and answer, so we'll actually be hearing more from Tammy and from Karen around some of the questions that you all sent in and also the questions that we've been seeing in the chat box. So we'll go ahead and start with the first question will be for Tammy. And the question is, what is the best way to collaborate between anti-trafficking programs and runaway and homeless youth programs?
That's a great question, and certainly you're going to hear this for the rest of the time we're together. It varies community to community. Specifically, I think it is about outreaching to a provider in your area and doing what you do best. Tell them you're interested in partnering and having that sit down and really taking that opportunity for the first conversation to be about not let me show you what I do better than anybody else. It's tell me what you need. And then get to the place where you talk about what you do better than anybody else. So often collaborations are stopped at the moment of inception because everyone's trying to demonstrate that they're the best person to be at the table. By making the call, by sending the email, by going to the website, you've already shown that you're a good person to have at the table. So just start slow, build out that opportunity to identify gaps, and then invite others to the table. You know, some of you have really expansive collaborations, as I mentioned. Some of you are just going to be that, igniting spark plug that may get one started in your community. And either way, I do think it starts with identifying needs first.
Great, thank you. Next question is for Karen. The question is, how would you keep the youth involved in services if they do not have a stable place to stay?
Well, that is something that Belle Fair is doing every single day. So we do have youth that aren't ready to come in, youth that aren't okay with their options, and so they're going to stay from, maybe wherever they're supposed to be, maybe. But so how do we stay connected with them and stay involved is by doing our street outreach. So we might have a youth in a school. We know that that's where they're at. We're still going to go check on them, let them know that we're here to help, reassess that they have their basic needs met. And, at some point, we typically get the call that says, I'm ready. This is not working. What other options do I have? So we also, which we really think has been moving around very strongly with our population, is that we're also now on Instagram and Facebook. And so we're posting different events, places to get a job interview, places where they might have free produce. So we're constantly making sure that the youth knows we're still there. We haven't gone anywhere. We're not giving up on you. So we're still in contact with them, whether they're sending us a text or an email. I know one of the things that I encourage everyone to do is the next time you're sitting in front of a youth, particularly one that is not stably housed, help them set up a free email. People seem to forget about this, but most of our kids do not have phones. If they do have phones, they do not have any minutes. They only connect with free Wi-Fi, so they don't have like a phone plan. But everybody can go to the library and hop on a computer and use a free email. So it's a great soft skill to be teaching our youth anyway, but it's also a way that we can stay connected. And so if their phone gets turned off or they're transient, that they can still reach out to us via the email. So hopefully that answers that question. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question will be for Tammy, and it is, how has Safe Place been in regarding to meeting with the youth within 45 minutes and connecting youth to services? And in addition, is there anything that mental health care providers can share with youth, specifically any other resources that you may have?
So yeah, that's a great question. You know, as I mentioned, the history of Safe Place has been around for a minute, and in different communities, they use different types of models. Specifically, some have a volunteer corps that respond to youth, some use staff to respond to youth, and the goal is to get someone to a Safe Place site to respond to a young person as quickly as possible. And that varies community to community. If we're talking rural, I will say that there have been Safe Place calls where it has been transporting a young person across the state because that was the nearest available resource. And I don't have to tell you guys how sparse resources are in certain states, especially in rural communities. So how are we responding to that? The Text for Help initiative was one way that we created a response that young people can get, at least talking to somebody immediately. They're not sitting in a lobby. They're not sitting, waiting for someone to come. We're also partnering with transit companies and first responders to create a model where both transit operators in larger cities and first responders have the information necessary to support youth across this multitude of needs. And so, yeah, it could be better. It just depends on the community. And so that's why we're kind of operating these new models. And if anybody goes to nationalsafeplace.org, you'll find some additional information. There's a tab on information around the multitude of other issues that young people face, including bullying and crisis and suicide and all of those things. I'll also say that if any of you are not familiar with the Child Traumatic Stress Network, again, Child Traumatic Stress Network, they just have a ton of resources that are mental health, clinically focused about the needs of individuals and ideas for mental health providers. So that might be a resource that you'd want to check out as well.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is for Karen. How do you establish more proficient connections with other providers, and how do you ensure that duplication of services do not hinder clients?
Those are both really good questions. So, we're establishing these connections through meetings in the community. Sometimes we've even done like email blasts where we're saying like, these are some of the services we provide. This is, the referral form, especially for law enforcement. If you're in need, just let us know, making sure people know what we do. And then having an understanding of what others are providing as well. Kind of the next question when it says duplication of services don't hinder the clients, that's something that we're really trying to be very aware of. So meeting the client where they're at, were they already engaged with a therapist in the community, or did they go to the LGBT center or the AIDS task force? Where are they comfortable? And then really clearly identifying who's going to do what and making sure that people are kind of staying in their lanes, right? Like, this is what you do, this is what we do, let's collaborate, but we also want to make sure that, if this child is going to Cleveland Rape Crisis, that they can get to Cleveland Rape Crisis. So they might not be able to help with the transportation, but we could do that warm transfer and make sure that they get to those appointments and make sure that they're connected to their next support. So I think that that's really important, that we understand the different roles that our community partners play and how we can collaborate and work together.
Thank you. The next question is for Tammy, and it's how short or long-term are the available housing opportunities generally within the RHY provider?
Okay, so thanks. And when you guys get the recording and you can listen to this again or check out the slides, I briefly talked about the length of stay for Basic Center up to 21 days, for TLP, maternity group home, 18 months with a potential 6-month extension, which doesn't feel like a lot. That language is the federally appropriated language, the authorized language. Many of these programs have additional programs and services. So don't assume that that's the upper limit. Ask that question and say, how long can they stay? How long can we work together?
Wonderful, thank you. The, the next question is for Karen, and it's, are there effective ways to use direct advocacy and outreach for ongoing connectivity with runaway and homeless youth who have experienced sexual violence and trafficking?
So hopefully I'm going to answer this correctly for the person who asked it, but if not, please let us know or let me know. The direct advocacy is really, I know I keep referencing it, but this warm transfer, right? So we might find some youth at a bus station who has then shared that they are victims of some trafficking and they're hiding and they're scared and they need help. And so then we can assist that youth and get them to the emergency room and really help be like this navigator for them. So helping them understand what's about to happen, the process, and just being there with them and making sure that they're feeling supported so that they get connected to the next resources that they need. So we work very closely at, I'm sure many of your communities have sexual assault nurse examiners, and if you don't know which hospitals provide them, I would definitely find out which hospitals have your sexual assault nurse examiners who are trained specifically to work with our victims of sex trafficking, sex violence, sexual violence, and they just do a really great job, and we collaborate with them very closely. So I think just like being present with them and helping advocate, because they don't even know that they're victims of trafficking, and so it's very hard for them to even articulate it because of the trauma. So by being present and supporting them, we're kind of walking them through the system.
Great, thank you. We're going to go ahead and answer some questions from the chat box. So the first couple of questions will be for Tammy, and one was on how you are defining homelessness, or at least within the context of this presentation, if it is based on HUD's definition, and also what age range is considered youth.
Thanks. So once again, we'll start with the age range. There's no lower end. I said in the chat box, we have had cases of young people who have run away 8, 9, 10 years of age. Certainly they require a different level of services. Many programs will start services around the age of 11 and 12, up to those ages that are based on their programs. So again, up to the age of 18 for Basic Center and up to the age of 22 for the Transitional Living programs. I will say that that specifically, it's when you think about that age range situation, it is about understanding that I'm talking about the RHY programs, and each community, some of them get, and I put in the chat log, Abraham was posting, and I talked about with a chat to Abraham that, yes, the field knows that there needs to be services for these, not only we talk about young people with this age range, but young people with special needs, both intellectually and emotionally and behaviorally, and there just aren't enough services to meet the needs across the board. And so certainly just ask the question in the community. You can take this as a parameter, and then when you connect, just make sure to ask that question. And it seems like there was another part to that, but I'm not sure if there was.
So the other part was just around the definition that we're using around homelessness.
Thanks so very much. And I actually saw somebody post and they actually indicated HUD has its own definition for homelessness. The RHY authorized language is slightly different. It's not based on the same prioritization, and it recognizes the way young people are homeless, that they are homeless if they don't have a place to be. They can be homeless under RHY if they are with friends and they just have to keep moving around and they're sleeping on couches. That would qualify under the RHY definitions and not under some others. So it's a very liberal definition that is really designed to help the most young people that are at risk.
Great. Thank you so much, Tammy. We're going to go ahead and have a question for Karen, and it was, the question in the chat box was, they were wondering about hearing more about the outreach operations, some examples and best practices. And it said covert outreach operations.
So yes, I remember Tammy mentioned that. And so safety is really, and harm reduction, again, are crucial in the success and safety of our youth. So we have, one of the things that we've done, as I said, we utilize social media. And so even if for some reason they can't remember the hotline, they could find it maybe on their Instagram page. We have what we call a shoe card, which is like a little index card. It's like a business card size, and it has the hotline on one side, and then on the other side it has quite a few different community partners, including rape crisis, food pantry numbers, different resources so that they can have them. So I'm trying to think of other examples. I mean, sometimes people say, well, like, you work with a lot of victims of sex trafficking, your title isn't anything about sex trafficking, and that's very intentional. So it's homeless and missing youth, because we want people to know that we're here for them, and we, want to make sure that it's safe. And so sometimes they're not ready to talk about that sex trauma or their history of abuse sexually, but they're needing support because they have no place to stay. So, at some point we have the expertise to work with that and help them with their trauma related to the sex trafficking, but we are very mindful in calling it homeless and missing youth. And as I said, in the past, we actually called it Runaway and Homeless, but in our community, we saw, because we had the tragedy, or actually the success, of the 3 women that had escaped that home after 10 years. And we just saw that there was so much empathy in our community. And so we started to highlight the symptoms of those behaviors as the running. And so that's been very successful. So hopefully that answered your question. And if not, please let me know.
Thank you. We have another question, Karen, and then also Tammy, feel free to jump in if you have further information. So Karen, you had mentioned a little bit about some databases to see if somebody had been reported as missing. So they're wondering about what type of databases are available.
So that's a great question, and I realized after I said that, like, I'm not really sure, like, what people do in Iowa or what someone does in Florida. So in Ohio, I can tell you that we have a database through our Attorney General office. So again, this is why it's so important to be talking to our community partners. So I would just ask your local law enforcement, how do you gather this information, and what, how does somebody file a missing person? What is the eligibility for it? Unfortunately, in Cleveland, we've had quite a few crimes where women were victimized, and so there's been some mandated laws in our community. So we have the Attorney General website, we have one for our county, and then we have one for the City of Cleveland. The City of Cleveland and the Cuyahoga County are mandated because of some issues with law enforcement and people that were missing. And so as a community, we said we have to keep better data. We have to know who these kids are and these young adults and adults so we can find them. But you can check with your local law enforcement or community partners such as the FBI and ask them, because it's going to be different for every state and every community. But it's really a great place to start to see, like, who's out there, and it also might help you see different hotspots in your community, where, like, we'll look at different trends. So, for example, we have one suburb, East Cleveland, and, they have 60 kids missing. The majority of the kids are missing from that city. So what's going on, and how can we collaborate with the schools and the libraries to provide more safety nets for those youth in that community? So get with law enforcement. They take the missing persons report and then see where they keep that data. all law enforcement sees the missing persons no matter what, but most communities also have a public database that everyone can access. So please look into it, and if you get stuck, let me know, and I'd be glad to help you navigate it.
Thank you, Karen. And then Tammy, you were going to also share another outreach strategy, so I'll go ahead and give you some.
Thanks. I will be quick, and I would also like to comment on the missing. I will say that, and a couple of examples is we know that if a young person is caught with materials, that can be dangerous. And so Karen hinted about the safety and I love the shoe card. That's a great idea. Other kinds of cards are just thinking about what is safe. And so there is kind of this perception that nail salons, hair salons, some kind of service is okay, that somehow they will encounter these services. And so an example that is in the blueprint document that you guys have as a resource is just a simple card with a pair of hair cutting scissors, and it says the cutting edge. And then underneath it, the tagline is ready for a change. And when they flip it over, it's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So it looks just like a salon card, and it is an outreach card. Another example is an agency that has a card that's like, you nailed it, and it's like just a set of nails. And then it's like, ready to be your best, and, and it's the agency's number. And so there's different ways that you can think about that, and being careful that if you're handing that off, certainly you don't leave those stacked around or you're going to have appointments you guys can't manage. But if you simply hand it to somebody and say, here, keep this with you. I think this is the safest way for you to have my number. Would encourage you to consider that. In terms of the missing, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is a really good resource. You can go to their website and you can look at all of the missing children that they're looking for, and certainly age progression for young people who were taken at a younger age has demonstrated that young people can be found years and years later. And I'll just say this as a philosophical point. A certain sad percentage of the young people that we see are never reported missing. They just aren't. And when we find a way to connect with the families, sometimes it's like, well, I told them to go and I don't want them back. And so the missing databases gives you a piece of the puzzle, and sometimes you won't find them there, and it doesn't mean, it's just that the people that should be missing them aren't.
Thank you, Tammy. And then we also received a question about shelters or organizations maybe not having the funding to work with immigrant kids. What do you recommend to be done in this case? So Tammy, if you could go ahead and share from your point of view, and then I'll also share a little bit from the anti-trafficking perspective.
Oh, I'd be really interested to hear what you say. That is such a tough issue for providers across the country. Certainly when you look at the border communities, not to be stereotypical, they just see bigger numbers, and so state and federal funding has flowed to those communities. And yet we know that these young people and these individuals aren't everywhere. To the specific question about what could you try, I think that people are finding innovative ways to build coalitions, whether it's host homes or private homes. There is a way to figure out an opportunity, a network. I know of a particular community where they have just partnered with a local hotel, not a hotel chain, the local hotel, and said, is there any way that in an emergency we can have a room? And that doesn't meet the needs of all of the individuals that you're serving. It's just when you're grasping for straws. And I know some of you have taken people home. Now, you won't put in the chat box that you've done it, but some of you have. And so you do what you do to try to keep people safe. And that's great, and it's still very, very difficult. Karen?
Thank you. And so one of the, I think, advantages of collaboration is being able to leverage the numerous resources that exist in different fields and also within organizations. And so for the anti-trafficking field, there are additional resources that can be leveraged in order to assist foreign nationals. And of course, that can mean foreign nationals who may be documented or may be undocumented. I think oftentimes people run into a challenge of serving someone who's undocumented. Fortunately, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act does have some benefits and services for both adults and for national minors who have been subjected to forms of trafficking, and that includes sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So I'm going to drop a link to the Office on Trafficking in Persons so you can learn a little bit more about it, but we just want to make sure that you know that through an anti-trafficking organization, you may be able to access some additional resources or at least be pointed in the right route. So we just want to make sure you're aware of that. So I'll go ahead and drop that link, but we have a couple more minutes, so I want to make sure we also get to some additional questions. The next question is for Tammy. I think you touched on this, but if you want to highlight it, is what housing resources do you have for pregnant survivors or survivors with children?
Yes, under the RHY federal funding, that is primarily going to be the maternity group home, though in many communities, transitional living programs will also serve pregnant youth or those that are parenting, and that varies based on kind of state law and state license for the individual provider. So don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you, Tammy. And then the next question is for Karen, and it is, what is the best way to support youth who are seen by multiple agencies? And this may be getting also at that duplication, so if you want to share anything in addition.
As far as working with youth that are multi-system involved or agency involved, we really feel it's so important just to bring everybody together, including that youth, empowering that youth, and helping them build their plan, their success, and making sure, again, that everybody has clear roles and that everybody kind of knows what their goal is that they're helping that youth achieve. So it's teamwork, it's sitting down together at the table and saying, you know, the youth might be turning 18, so they might have been involved with a mental health provider that only works with minors. So, you know, maybe it's time for that service to stop and linking them to services that will be able to help them as they move into being young adults. So just bringing everybody together, for sure having releases of information and talking to them, at least talking to them all, so that we're all on the same page and so we can help them.
Thank you, Karen. And then finally, we'll end with the question of what type of resources are available for trans youth? And so Tammy, if you can lead us off with that one, and then Karen, feel free to jump into that one for what resources you may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, the first thing I would say is that programs, I told you you'd hear this from me multiple times, they vary in terms of their capacity, and I will even say understanding. I think that a wave of change goes across the country, and you'll get some states that catch on quicker than others, and you want everyone to be responsive to what each young person needs, whoever they are and however they see themselves. They're critical as individuals, and so how do programs respond? I would go to a website of a provider and I would look at their language and their website to see if you think that they're going to have services, and then pick up the phone and call. As I said, some offer support groups, some offer full services in all of their programs, some have specialized care. I can't give you a list. I will say that you know, certainly they are there. If you reach out to info@rytac.net, info@rytac, RHYTTAC.net, and say, I'm looking to find a provider that will serve, you know, a specific population, you know, within the parameters I've discussed on the webinar. We'll try to figure out a way to help you find a provider in a particular community if one exists.
I was just going to add another resource that people could reach out to is their United Way. That is a national program, and they have that first call for help, and they also have a wealth of resources, and that number is 211.
Great. Thank you so much, Tammy and Karen. You all have been fantastic. I think we all really appreciate your knowledge and expertise. We want to also invite you to complete a survey. This is for all participants. We want to know how you're finding these webinars, and specifically today's webinar. Was it useful for you? Did it meet your expectations? We want to make sure that we are putting on the best webinars and putting information that's useful and relevant to you. So please take a moment to complete the survey that's going to come up once we end today's webinar. Also, if you would like a certificate of completion, you can email us at training@freedomnetworkusa.org. We're going to go ahead and put that in the chat. You'll see that. And of course, please feel free to connect with the resources that have been mentioned throughout the webinar. Like Tammy mentioned, there are a couple of resources already preloaded there that you can click download files and it'll take you to those resources. You can visit the housing page, which specifically has resources on housing for survivors of trafficking. The resource library has all of our previous webinars, and we will always upload this webinar and additional webinars in the future, as well as fact sheets. And of course, you can email us if you have any additional questions or would like to get further information. Thank you again. We really appreciate you. If you have any outstanding questions, please go ahead and let us know, and we're happy to make the connection with those questions and also with the presenters, if that would be useful. We're going to be sending a follow-up email in the next week or so, which will have the slides, it'll have the recording, and it'll have the attachment of resources that were discussed today. And we will be hosting our next webinar in March. So look out for that. If you registered for today's webinar, you will receive an email alerting you to the date and then also the topic. So look out for that, and we look forward to seeing you then.